Hello friends, my name is host Eric and this is Rachel, and together we comprise Talking with Famous People, the internet's most reliable typology resource. And we get a lot of questions about typology stuff and people doubt whether or not it's meaningful. They say Big Five perhaps is more reliable or more empirically established. They prefer using IQ tests or some other sort of utility driven framework. But I continue to maintain that, in fact, typology is the best framework, and I think that a lot of the problem stems from the fact that we fail to break down in ways that sometimes people can experientially connect to. But you should recognize the following basic 4 ways in all the people you encounter in life. Talking with famous people.
The first one is judging,
Which means they deliberate about stuff, the FI or TI DOMs. They decide first when something happens.
The next is acting.
These people try to impact the world with either SE or NE, and then they think about it.
Followed by interfacing.
Now, the interfacers are responsive to changes in real time in a dynamic system. Those are your TE and your FE DOMs.
And last is knowing.
Those are the observational types. Instead of being the subject or the object of the action, they're sort of standing off to the side and knowing about it. Those are your SI and NI DOMs. Now, we're going to go through a couple of analogies involving dogs today. The first one of which involves a ball.
When a ball is thrown,
What we're going to look at here is how each of the 4 groups of dogs responds differently when the ball is thrown. Remember, the 4 groups of dogs are the sitting dogs, that's the deliberators, the standing dogs, that's the knowers, the jumping dogs, that's the action dogs, and the half dogs, which are the interfacers. So let's take a look. The sitting dogs are deliberators. When the ball is thrown,
deliberative dogs consider whether to fetch.
right, you throw the ball, they think, do I want to get this? Either with my feelings, or is it logical for me to get this? Or is it fair for me to get this? Is another consideration that a TI dog might have. Okay, let's look at the next group. The standing dogs are the knowers. When a ball is thrown to a knower,
Receiving dogs catch the ball.
sure, somebody who's designed to receive information is likely to catch balls that are thrown at them. Okay, next let's look at the jumping dogs or action types. When a ball is thrown to an SE or NE DOM,
Action dogs frame grab by playing You Can't Catch Me.
so the action dog might go get the ball, but he's not going to bring it back to you. He's going to try to make you chase him around because that's the game the action dog wants to play. And lastly, we've got the half dogs or interfacers. When a ball is thrown to somebody with TE or FE in the dominant slot,
Interfacing dogs engage the person or the situation.
so for an FE dom dog, they might look a lot to their owner to see how badly their owner wants them to get the ball. For a TE dom, they might determine whether or not the ball has been thrown in a place where it's practical or reasonable for them to actually manage to go get it, or if it's going to be too difficult. Okay, so I said we talked about a couple of different dog analogies. The first one was this ball throwing analogy, which helps us distinguish between the different groups. What's next? Well, we're back to the sitting dogs again, the deliberators, but this time we're going to look at them one at a time and see how they respond to food, or how they integrate food into their dog lives. First, we've got ISFP. You'll see he's all blue. ISFP being all blue means both of the first 2 functions are physical functions or non-communicative functions. For the ISFP, that's FISE. If you see a gold-lettered function, that means it's communicative or metaphysical. How does ISFP deal with food?
ISFP dog decides what it wants to eat and then eats it.
Very straightforward, very simple, not a lot of calculation or mapping involved. Next, let's look at the second of our sitting dogs, the INFP, also an FI DOM, but this one paired with the communicative function in the second slot, NE. How do they deal with food?
INFP dog can't decide what food it wants, but it's not this.
Whatever it is you're serving in, that's not what they wanted. They wanted something with some seaweed or some pearl mushrooms or some other strange thing. Okay, now let's look at the third sitting dog, the ISTP, atypically looking adorable in this picture. And as you can see, they've got the communicative function first with the TI and the physical or non-communicative function second with SE. How do they deal with food?
ISTP dog determines the least well-guarded food eats that.
Yep, because they know that the best food is the people food, or the food in the trash can that they're not supposed to eat. So they'll identify who's least guarded about their food, and or where the food is least guarded, and they'll go steal that food. And lastly, of our sitting dogs is the purely communicative type, or the metaphysical kind, all yellow, T-I-N-E, the INTP. How do they deal with food?
INTP dog waits a long time for his bowl to be brought to him, eventually gives up and walks to his bowl, disillusioned to discover the content is stale.
Yep, he waited too long for somebody to bring him his bowl. Now his food's stale, so he just has a couple of bites of it, a few licks of water, and lies down by his book again with a big sigh. Okay, and that's going to sum up our sitting dogs, or deliberative types, and how they deal with food. Let's go on to the next group, and that's our standing dogs, or knowers. First, we've got the ISTJ, the most physical of the knowing types, with SITE as the first two functions. How do they deal with food?
ISTJ dog knows how to tip over his bag of food, making it pour out.
So, ISTJ dog knows where his bag of food is kept, and has learned the trick to tip over that particular container to make it pour out onto the floor so he can eat the food. Mm-hmm. Now let's contrast this with another knowing dog that begins with a physical function, SI again, but this time follows it with FE, a communicative function. How did they deal with food?
ISFJ dog knows how to make their person pour them food.
Mm-hmm. Exactly the right whimper, or the big puppy dog eyes, or the sad face or angry face, or whatever dog face it makes to get the owner to feed it. ISFJ knows that. Now let's look at the INTJ dog, who is metaphysical first, or communicative first, and physical second with the TE. How did they deal with food?
INTJ dog knows food attainment requires pouring.
So where ISTJ dog knows how to pour out its own bag of food to get its own food from its own container, INTJ gets the concept of porridge is required. In other words, they will be able to generalize the acquisition of food through tipping over of containers, even if the containers change or the location of those containers change, or other things about them make them unfamiliar to the INTJ. They'll have a more universal understanding of the relationship between porridge and food acquisition. Now, I don't mean porridge like the kind that you put in a bowl that's too hot or too cold. I mean POUR-AGE. Now let's look at the last of the knowers. The INFJ, all yellow, that means there are two communicative functions, and INFE in the first two slots. How do they deal with food?
INFJ dog knows food attainment requires people who feed you.
And so, of course, all four of these dogs are correct. The ISTJ dog has correctly figured out how to feed itself when it wants to. The ISFJ dog, same thing. The INTJ dog has successfully figured out how to feed itself even when problems arise, or newnesses arise. And the INFJ dog, the same thing. But they take different strategies. Okay, so now let's look at the next group, and that's the jumping dogs, the action types. How does the ESFP, the most physical of these types, deal with food? Let's find out.
ESFP dogs get food by killing and eating things they see.
If your cat wanders into your ESFP dog's neighbor's yard, then that's your ESFP neighbor's dog's lunch. So, just how it is. Next, let's talk about the ESTP dog, which has a communicative function second. TI, logic, second.
Istp dog gets food by stealing it from everyone's plate.
Easier to seek forgiveness than permission. Why am I even bothering to sneak around? I'm just going to just go run up right up there and grab that rib and eat it before they can even take it away from me. Mm-hmm. If they get mad, I'll just run away until they're not mad anymore. ENFP, they have the metaphysical function first and the physical second, which means I call them an analyst type. And how do they deal with food?
ENFP dogs refuse to eat until after taken for a walk.
They're a little bit particular, a little fussy. They like things their way. Okay? Don't, because here come the waterworks.
It's true.
All right, and lastly, the all metaphysical one of these, that's NETI, ENTP, both communicative functions. How do they deal with the food?
ENTP dog wolfs down his food and then barks at the family throughout dinner.
Yeah, mostly annoying everybody. Okay, now let's go on to the last category of dogs, I believe, which is the interfacers or half dogs. Why are they half dogs? Because we don't know how they're going to act, because it's going to be responsive to some elements that are dynamic in real time in the situation. But let's take a look at ESTJ. How might he act? This is the most physical of the interfacers, with TE, SI, both of them physical functions or non-communicative in the first two slots.
ESTJ Dog goes to his bowl exactly 3 minutes before mealtime.
He waits patiently then for precisely those 3 minutes, and if the food isn't poured at the end of those 3 minutes, he starts making faces at the owner and looking around like, oh, is the world coming to an end? My expected normalcy has been deviated from. Okay, now let's look at the ENTJ Dog. What does the ENTJ Dog do?
ENTJ Dog tells himself he should eat, but just has coffee instead.
Now, ENTJ Dog starts with the physical, but it's TE, it's a problem-solving frame. Their second function, NI, is the metaphysical communicative one, but that means SI polar, so they just are not very attentive to their body. That, you'll see, is probably why this ENTJ Dog has allowed his bangs to cover his eyes, which clearly interferes with his vision. Okay, let's try the next one. ESFJ Dog. This one flips the order there. It's the metaphysical one first, FE, that's the communication one, and the physical SI knowing function second. Let's see how they deal with food.
ESFJ Dog expects all family members to share all food equally. Encourages you to try to kibble.
It's probably delicious, you know. That's what the ESFJ Dog is telling you anyway. And lastly, the ENFJ Dog, like the ENTJ Dog, doesn't really pay much attention to its own body, but unlike the ENTJ Dog, does pay a lot of attention to what's expected of it. So,
ENFJ Dogs eat when it's the socially appropriate choice.
If everybody else is eating, and it would seem weird if they weren't eating, then they eat. Usually that happens frequently enough that they don't starve to death. So, I believe that's the end of our presentation today. It is. I hope you enjoyed our dog analogy, and I hope you found it fun to discover what kind of dog you are and how you would engage with food in your life if you were a dog. The end. Talking with famous people.